The last day. It was a quiet Tuesday morning, April 12th, 1994. The kind of day where nothing in particular seemed unusual in Maple Falls, Colorado. A town so small, the postman still waved at everyone by name, and kids rode their bikes without helmets. It was a town that hadn't seen a serious crime in over a decade. But by the time the sun dipped behind the snow-capped peaks that evening, a gentle, well-loved school teacher would be missing without a trace, and Maple Falls would never feel safe again. Sarah Clarke was 27 years old. Her friends described her as warm, quirky, a little forgetful sometimes, but always dependable. She had this quiet kind of charm, the type of person who remembered your birthday, your dog's name, and your favorite tea. Sarah lived alone in a small cottage just 2 blocks from Elm Ridge Elementary, where she taught 4th grade. She had a beagle named Juno who followed her everywhere, even to the mailbox. That morning, Sarah was scheduled to teach a math review at 8 a.m. sharp. She always arrived by 7:30, coffee in hand, cardigan over her shoulder. But that day, she didn't show. No call, no substitute arranged, nothing. At first, no one panicked. Teachers have car trouble, teachers get sick. But by 9:15, the principal had called her landline. No answer. They tried again at 10 o'clock, then 11:30. By noon, they got worried enough to call her emergency contact, her fiancé, Paul Manning. Paul, a 32-year-old structural engineer, lived in a neighboring town called Ridgeview, about a 40-minute drive away. They'd been engaged for just over a year and were supposed to get married that summer. When Paul answered the phone, he reportedly sounded calm, almost too calm. According to the principal, when informed that Sarah hadn't shown up, Paul said something strange. "She's probably just out clearing her head. She's done that before." Except she hadn't. Not ever. Sarah had never just disappeared. She didn't do spontaneous. She made lists. She set reminders on the fridge. By 2:17 p.m., Paul had arrived at Sarah's house. The moment he opened the door, everything felt wrong. The living room light was on. The lamp on the side table was still glowing, even though Sarah was meticulous about saving power. Her beige cardigan was folded neatly over the arm of the couch. Her handbag sat untouched on the coffee table, wallet inside, keys inside, even her little lavender coin pouch, which she never left home without. The only thing that wasn't there was Sarah, and she hadn't just left. She hadn't planned a trip or packed a bag. In the kitchen, there was a mug of chamomile tea still steeping on the counter. The water had gone cold, but not completely. Her back door was locked. No signs of a break-in. Nothing broken, no smashed windows, no overturned furniture. The dining table had an open notebook with lesson plans scribbled in her handwriting. Her slippers were by the kitchen stool. Juno, her dog, was pacing in circles, whining softly, the water bowl empty. It was like Sarah had stood up to do something and never returned. Now here's where it gets even stranger. Her favorite navy blue sneakers were missing from the shoe rack, but nothing else. Not a backpack, not a water bottle, not even a jacket was gone. And this stood out because Sarah hated wearing those sneakers. She used them only when she was gardening or when she took Juno on her once-a-month hike. But this was April. There was snow on the trails. There was no way she would have gone walking alone. Not without telling someone. Paul stayed at the house while the police were called. Officers arrived by 4 p.m. and began documenting everything. At first, they treated it like a missing person case. No crime scene, no blood, no broken locks. And Paul? Cooperative, but cold. The only neighbor who had seen anything unusual was a woman named Marlene, who lived across the street. She told officers she'd seen Sarah on the porch the night before, around 7:30 p.m., wearing a red sweater and watering her potted tulips. "She waved at me," Marlene said, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. The next morning, around 6:45 a.m., Marlene said she saw the porch light still on, which was strange. Sarah always turned it off before sunrise, but Marlene assumed she'd left early or forgotten. It was only later that Marlene realized she hadn't heard Juno bark that morning. Juno always barked. As evening fell, search parties began organizing. Flyers were printed and her photo was shared with local news. Missing woman, Sarah Clarke, 27, last seen Monday night. 5 feet 5 inches, brown hair, hazel eyes. Volunteers combed the area, but no one found anything. No clothing, no footprints, no drag marks, nothing. It was as though she had stepped out of existence. And still, there was no clear direction, no suspects, no answers. But there was one final detail, something that the police didn't release to the public at the time. When they dusted the kitchen counter for prints, just to be thorough, they found a partial fingerprint on Sarah's favorite mug. The problem? It didn't match Sarah, and it didn't match Paul either. The search begins. By the second day of Sarah Clarke's disappearance, the quiet calm of Maple Falls had turned to unease. Posters with Sarah's face were now taped to every storefront window and telephone pole in town. Her soft features, kind eyes, and slightly awkward smile had become a haunting reminder that someone, or something, had taken her, and no one could explain how. The police initially categorized it as a voluntary disappearance. No signs of struggle, no broken locks, no ransom demands, just a woman, gone. But Sarah's friends and family weren't buying it. Her best friend Lydia, who had known Sarah since college, was the first to say it out loud. Something is wrong. Sarah wouldn't run away, not like this. Lydia had spoken to Sarah just 3 days before she vanished. They'd talked about wedding plans, classroom decorations, and a new herbal tea she was trying that smelled like wet socks but helped with migraines. Nothing about Sarah's voice suggested fear, but there was something distant. Lydia remembered that Sarah paused at least 3 times in their conversation, almost like she was distracted or listening to something. And then there was Paul. Sarah's fiancé was at the center of everything. When police interviewed him again on day 3, his behavior raised eyebrows. While he answered all their questions, he showed no emotion, no frustration, no panic, just blank. One officer noted in the report, Paul refers to Sarah exclusively in the past tense. When asked if Sarah had ever seemed depressed or withdrawn, Paul replied, "She had her moods. Maybe she needed a break. That's all." But it wasn't all. Police also learned that Sarah and Paul had taken a break from their engagement 2 months prior, and During that time, Sarah had expressed doubts about the relationship to Lydia and her parents. She'd said Paul was controlling, dismissive, and that he kept secrets. Still, there was no evidence to prove anything. No violence, no financial motive, no affair. The investigation shifted toward Sarah's recent activities, any hint that something or someone might have triggered her disappearance. That's when detectives uncovered a strange detail. 2 days before she vanished, on April 10th, Sarah had called the Maple Ridge Forestry Department. The call lasted just under 4 minutes. According to the park ranger's log, she asked, "Are there any caves or abandoned cabins near the Ridge Trail system, ones not listed on the public maps?" When asked why, Sarah reportedly said she was planning a lesson on local geography. The ranger gave her general answers, but afterward noted her tone was nervous. It was a strange thing for a fourth-grade teacher to inquire about, especially someone who hated hiking and barely taught science. Investigators grew more concerned when they discovered something else. On April 11th, the night before she went missing, Sarah had logged onto her school computer at 11:37 p.m. and downloaded a topographic map of the Maple Ridge Trail and surrounding wilderness. But Sarah's internet habits were clean. She didn't browse conspiracy forums, didn't search for survival gear, and didn't own hiking boots. She wasn't the disappear into the woods type. So why the sudden interest? As the search expanded, volunteers fanned out across 10 miles of rugged terrain. It was springtime in Colorado. The snow was melting, but temperatures still dropped below freezing at night. Teams searched the trail system, rivers, cliffsides, and caves, the ones on the map and the ones known only to locals. Dogs were brought in from Denver, helicopters hovered above the ridge, and divers checked nearby ponds and wells. Still nothing. Then came the first break, or what they thought was a break. A couple hiking on Ridge Trail reported hearing a dog barking, frantic, nonstop, coming from a dense cluster of pine trees about 2 miles off the main path. They followed the sound for nearly 15 minutes, but when they reached a small clearing, it stopped. Just silence. When police arrived the next morning, there were no dog prints, no signs of Juno, no broken branches, just pine needles and fog. Back at Sarah's home, detectives began processing her belongings more carefully. They dusted for prints, searched for hidden notes, computer clues, anything. And that's when they found the mug, the same one with the lavender tea that had gone cold on the counter. On the rim of that mug was a partial fingerprint. It didn't match Sarah, it didn't match Paul, and it didn't match anyone in the national database. It was a ghost print, someone who had been there, briefly, quietly, and then gone. At this point, theories exploded. One theory was that Sarah had a secret lover, someone she met in town, who had convinced her to leave her life behind. But no evidence of this ever emerged. Another theory, one whispered more than spoken, was that Paul had found out Sarah was planning to break off the engagement and snapped. Yet the forensic evidence didn't back that up. No blood, no cleanup, no drag marks. If he had harmed her, where did he do it? And where did he put her? Then there was the third theory, the one Sarah herself had hinted at. Lydia recalled that a few weeks before she disappeared, Sarah had told her, "I feel like someone's watching me, but when I turn around, there's no one there." Sarah had asked if Lydia ever got the feeling that people could be in your house without you knowing, not breaking in, just already there, in the attic, in the basement, behind the walls. At the time, Lydia laughed it off. She assumed Sarah was just being dramatic, the way she got after watching too many mystery documentaries. But now that her best friend had vanished, Lydia wasn't laughing anymore. And neither were the detectives. 6 years later, the case went cold. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Then years. Sarah Clarke's name slowly faded from the headlines. Her missing posters were peeled away by wind and rain. Her fourth-grade classroom was reassigned. Her dog, Juno, was adopted by Sarah's mother, who refused to change the locks at Sarah's house, just in case she came back. And as for Paul, he moved quietly. No forwarding address, no new contact info left with police. Just gone. The last thing he said to Sarah's mother was, "I hope she finds peace wherever she is." It wasn't closure. It wasn't even comfort. By 1998, the Maple Falls police had all but stopped investigating. The case file was filed under a gray cabinet tab marked Unsolved until June 2000. It was a warm Sunday afternoon. A college student named Travis Myers was hiking with his girlfriend through a restricted section of forest just north of the Maple Ridge Trail. They had wandered off the beaten path, trying to find a rumored waterfall locals called Whisper Rock. As they pushed through a wall of overgrowth, Travis tripped on something hard. At first, he thought it was a rock, maybe the edge of a buried log. But when he looked closer, it was white, curved, smooth, almost polished. It was a shoe, a single navy blue running sneaker, half buried in moss and soil. He lifted it carefully, and then he dropped it. Inside the shoe was a small bone, a human toe bone. The couple sprinted back to the main trail, flagged down another group of hikers, and called the police. Within hours, the entire area was sealed off with yellow tape. Over the next 2 days, a forensic team from Denver combed the site. Under a thin layer of rock and earth, they discovered what was later confirmed to be a shallow grave. The remains inside belonged to a woman, adult, approximately mid to late 20s, partial skeleton, fractured skull, no ID. But one item survived the elements, a silver locket. It was tarnished and dented, but when they pried it open, it revealed a small photograph. 2 people, Sarah Clarke and Paul Manning. Scratched into the inside of the locket was a date, April 10th, 1994, 2 days before Sarah disappeared. The next week, dental records confirmed what everyone feared. The body was Sarah's. She hadn't run away. She hadn't started a new life in some far-off country. She had been lying just 2 miles from her own backyard, buried in silence, surrounded by pine trees, her story swallowed by the forest. The autopsy was chilling. Sarah had died from blunt force trauma, a single blow to the side of the skull. Based on decomposition, the medical examiner estimated her time of death as April 12, 1994. The same day she was reported missing, there were no signs of defensive wounds, no sign she had tried to fight back. It was as if she'd been ambushed. Investigators returned to the fingerprint found on her mug, still unmatched. But now they had a new theory. Maybe Sarah had invited someone in, someone she trusted. Maybe they had tea, talked, walked outside, and maybe they never came back. But there was one more thing. When detectives looked at the map coordinates where Sarah's body had been found, something clicked. Less than half a mile away stood a small, abandoned cabin, one that wasn't marked on any tourist maps, one that wasn't visible from the trails. It belonged to Paul Manning. He had inherited it from his uncle in the early 90s. It was never part of the investigation because Paul claimed he hadn't used it in years. But when detectives visited the site in 2000, they found something strange in the basement. The floor, which was once dirt, had been hastily covered with cement. Not professionally, not smoothly, just enough to hide something. Ground-penetrating radar revealed disturbance patterns beneath the concrete, uneven density that suggested digging. When police attempted to contact Paul for questioning, he didn't respond. They sent officers to his listed address in Ridgeview. He was gone. Neighbors hadn't seen him in months. His mailbox was overflowing. The landlord said Paul had broken his lease without notice, 3 weeks before Sarah's body was discovered. Warrants were issued. Alerts went out across state lines. But Paul Manning had vanished, just like Sarah once had. To this day, Paul has never been found. No confirmed sightings, no credit card usage, no phone activity. Some believe he fled the country. Others think he may have taken his own life in the Colorado wilderness. But one theory, one whispered even now in Maple Falls, is that Paul never left. They say he built escape tunnels, that he knew the forest better than anyone, that he watches the trail from deep within the trees, and that he knows how to stay hidden, just like the body did for 6 long years. The final clue. After 6 long years of silence, Sarah Clarke had been found. But the discovery of her remains didn't bring answers. It brought new questions, and worse, new fears, the kind that nest in your spine and refuse to leave. The Maple Falls police, now under public pressure to act, officially reopened the case in July 2000. Their prime suspect? Paul Manning, the charming, quiet engineer who had once planned to marry Sarah and who now had vanished without a trace. The case seemed open and shut. Sarah's locket was buried with her body. The location of the grave was a short walk from Paul's inherited cabin. The concrete basement floor had been newly patched, with the same brand of cement found on Paul's worksite 2 months before Sarah disappeared. But it wasn't enough. It was circumstantial. There was no physical evidence inside the cabin, no DNA, no murder weapon, and Paul had disappeared before he could be interviewed. His last official act was withdrawing $8,500 in cash from 2 different banks, all done over 2 days, just weeks before Sarah's remains were identified. Detectives began scouring everything connected to Paul, his phone records, emails, past jobs. That's when they found something odd, not illegal, but unnerving. Paul had a habit of signing up for firearms safety courses and hunting permits. Over a 5-year span, he'd registered for 3 different hunting licenses, all in different names. One of them used a fake address, which turned out to be a storage facility in Idaho. That storage unit was searched in August 2000. Inside, police found a few camping tools, a fishing rod, and a box marked Old Projects. Inside the box was an old Polaroid photo of Sarah standing in front of Paul's cabin, smiling, dated March 1994. But what really disturbed investigators was the second photo. It was taken in the woods. Same day, same film. Sarah kneeling beside a moss-covered rock, staring at something just out of frame. Behind her, partly hidden by shadows, was a man. The man's face was blurry. His eyes reflected light, animal-like, and although he was partially obscured, there was something sinister about his posture, as though he hadn't expected to be caught in the shot. Investigators couldn't confirm who he was. Paul wasn't in the photo. Neither were any known friends or neighbors. But based on terrain analysis, the image was taken less than 100 feet from the grave where Sarah's remains were found, which raised a horrifying possibility. Was there someone else out there? Someone even Paul didn't know about? Lydia, Sarah's best friend, had a different theory. In late 2000, she shared a diary with the police, one Sarah had kept for years. Most of it was light reading, student stories, favorite recipes, doodles of teacups, but toward the back were a few pages that had been added in the months before she disappeared. They were written differently, sharper, faster, like she was writing while scared. One entry read, "I keep seeing him again. I told Paul, but he says I'm being paranoid. But he's there. I saw him by the trail. I saw his coat. I'm not crazy." Another read, "He knocks once at night. Never more. I pretend I don't hear it. Maybe I'll move." She never did. There was no name, no physical description, but she'd drawn something next to the entry, a rough sketch of an eye, just a single eye, watching. The police followed up on the claims, even re-interviewing residents near Sarah's house. A few vaguely remembered her talking about feeling uneasy, but no one had ever seen a strange man near the property. Except one. A retired park ranger named Chuck Harding came forward with a bizarre story. He said in the spring of 1994, he'd been out surveying trails near Ridge Trail when he spotted a man in a gray jacket watching him from the tree line. When he approached, the man turned and vanished into the woods. "He moved like he belonged there," Chuck said, "like he lived there." But Chuck had shrugged it off at the time. Rangers see a lot of odd things. It was only when Sarah's grave was discovered that he made the connection. The man had been standing roughly 200 yards from the site. The final blow came in 2001 when forensic analysts returned to the basement of Paul's cabin. After months of trying to justify a warrant, they were finally allowed to break open the cement floor. What they found wasn't a body. It wasn't even a murder weapon. It was a box. Inside, rope, a roll of duct tape, a pair of gloves, and a photograph of Sarah, sleeping, taken from outside her bedroom window. It was dated March 28, 1994. That was 2 weeks before she vanished. Despite the evidence, the district attorney refused to file charges, not without Paul in custody. And Paul, as of today, has never been found. Some believe he died in the woods. Others say he's living under a new name in another country. But some, including Sarah's mother, believe he's still in Maple Falls. They believe he never left, that he still walks the trails just out of sight, that he knows all the secret places, that maybe he wasn't alone that day. Maybe someone else was in the woods, watching, waiting, and maybe that person still is. What happened to Sarah Clarke will likely never be fully understood. A young teacher, full of life, loved by many, gone in a blink, buried in the woods, forgotten by the system, but never forgotten by the people who still search for the truth. Let us know what you think in the comments. Was Paul the killer? Or was something even darker stalking Sarah in those final days? Subscribe for more strange, dark, and true stories, delivered every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, right here on Real Tales Unfold. Because sometimes the most terrifying mysteries are real.